House and the Senate, along with the President of the United States, have a duty to keep this country, that's us, safe and secure. So are they really doing that? Or is Congress a bureaucratic mess and we are just lucky we haven't been hit again? Former Nebraska Senator Bob Kerry was a member of the 9/11 Commission. Moments ago, he went on the record. Sir, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right, there's been an awful lot of attention, for good reason, on the man who traveled from Nigeria to Amsterdam to Detroit. There's been attention on how the U.S. responded, what we're doing, and on President Obama and how he's handled it. What about the United States Congress? Should we have the spotlight on them as well?
I believe we should, not so much on the individual members, but on the structure, particularly of the oversight, both the intelligence agencies as well as Homeland Security's. It was one of the primary recommendations the 9/11 Commission made in 2004. Congress very quickly reformed the structure of the executive branch. And I think when John McCain offered the amendment, he got 12 or 13 votes to restructure the Congress. And we said unless and until that gets done, it's very difficult to imagine the Congress providing not just the kind of oversight, but the kind of follow-up necessary to make certain that the executive branch not just is getting the job done, but has the kind of full nonpartisan partner that it needs when you're dealing with very complicated and complex situations such as this.
Well, it seems to me that, one of the most basic things was to get data to go into some sort of central place so it can be analyzed. I mean, the most basic thing. And I realize the complexity of it, but that at least was part of your recommendation on your commission, was it not?
Well, it was. That was also one of the recommendations that we made. But again, let me put it this way. Let me say two things about the 9/11 Commission. One, the 9/11 Commission, remember, was created because the people, and particularly the victims' families, didn't trust a report that had already been produced by the Congress. So it created this special entity that lasted for about 18 months because Congress wasn't doing its job. And we made that observation, and we came back and said, look, you've got to change the way that you are doing your business. But secondly, I would say that the 9/11 Commission identified a number of things that we asked the Congress to follow up on, perhaps most importantly following up on the relationship between this guy al-Awlaki and a number of the 9/11 perpetrators, and no action happened, neither on the executive or in the legislative branch. So again, we said unless and until Congress changes the authorities of these committees that have oversight, because remember, Greta, all the oversight for the intelligence committees occurs in a classified environment. There isn't any free and open press. There's no FOIA requests that are going on that allow alternative ways to make certain the executive branch is doing its job. So there's a real weakness here, and my own belief is it's likely Congress is going to do all it can to avoid, not because of any personal unwillingness to do it, but it's the Appropriations Committee power and the Armed Services Committee power. It's very difficult to change these jurisdictions. I'm very sympathetic. I was on both the Appropriations Committee and the Intelligence Committee, and I'm sympathetic with the difficulty making the change. But I think you're going to get this kind of incident repeated in the future until Congress restructures itself.
Well, you use a word like weakness, but as I sit and listen to you, my blood boils, because it is outrageous that when you deliver to the organization, to the body, Congress, specific recommendations, and they agree that these are important recommendations, and these are the things that are going to keep us safe in the air and on the ground from planes running into buildings or flying into buildings, and then the very people who have the oversight don't do it. This hasn't been implemented. It's terrifying to us to learn of it after the fact.
Well, by the way, it's not a partisan. This is not a partisan issue. This is just the jurisdiction issue of the Congress. Look, this gentleman, this guy should not have gotten on the plane. He was clearly a security risk. His father even had warned us. He shouldn't have gotten on the plane. His visa should have been revoked, and it wasn't revoked. But there were other things. There's other things that have not been done since the 9/11 Commission made its recommendation. And as our Chairman Kane said, the language that it's explaining what's happened is eerily reminiscent. The system failed, the communication wasn't occurring, etc. And there are a number of things that I think can be done that have nothing to do with the legislative branch, changing the way visas are issued, changing the way that oversight occurs, changing a number of other things that I think will reduce and minimize the risk going forward. But there's going to be a big weakness if you don't strengthen the two committees that have the responsibility accountability. I think Homeland Security, Greta, still reports to 80-plus different oversight committees in the House and in the Senate. They simply don't have the kind of single, I would say, competent effort going on that they need. And from my experience, I was 8 years on the Intelligence Committee. I think the appointment should be made based upon competency, based upon willingness to do the work. There should be no partisan considerations being given whatsoever, and they need to be given the resources so they can hire the kind of competent staff that's necessary to do the work in this classified environment.
All right, so they're not doing the work, and we citizens may ultimately pay the price, and some may pay it very dearly with their lives or their loved ones. So how do we get the members of Congress to do their oversight job? Do we name names, or do we because this is not something that's insignificant. This isn't, as I say, renaming a post office. This truly is about our national security, about people's lives. And it's horrible to go back and study to see what happened when we could have prevented it in the beginning. And the very people of oversight have lots of things they need to do and aren't doing it.
Well, I think, as we said in our report, I think we said it's likely that the American people are simply going to have to put pressure on Congress to make this change because, again, it's not partisan. It's just the prerogatives of the chair and the ranking members. And I don't hold any personal animus at all. Again, I've been in this situation. It's not easy if you're Armed Services or Appropriation to surrender some authority. But these committees are way too weak. They simply don't have the capacity to provide the kind of sustained oversight. And I'll say it again, I'm not sure that anybody on the Intelligence Committee has got time to do anything but that committee. Maybe they got time to do one additional, but unless you're doing the work, both leaders, Republican and Democrat, in both the House and the Senate, need to make certain that the individuals that are appointed to those committees, once those committees have the authority necessary to do the job, and the language that we use in the Commission is very specific, you got to make certain that they are doing the job. You can't just appoint people because they've asked to be on the committee.
Is there one single thing that we could do right now that would at least move this forward so much faster? I mean, is there one sort of big block on this right now? One person, one procedure, is there anything in the way so that at least we can move this to the next step?
Well, this particular situation, you got to change the way visas are done. And there's some counterintuitive things that probably need to be done. There are a lot of countries where issuing visas aren't a problem at all. And by the way, one of the things that's also counterintuitive, we require an interview for every person who's making an application for a visa, and as a consequence, the people that are working in the consular offices are interviewing everybody rather than identifying people that are particularly risky and giving them longer interviews and making certain that they're doing the kind of diligent interviews that are necessary when you're dealing with somebody that's at risk. So yes, I think there's a number of things that can be done in the short term, but I think in the long term, and it's not just putting us at risk. The question is, are we spending enough money? Is the technology investments correctly? I mean, some of these questions have nothing to do with short-term risk and have everything to do with the kind of long-term investments that very often are necessary when you're making very expensive investments in remote sensing devices and very difficult to develop in a hurry investments in human resources, trying to develop the capabilities that you're going to need not just today, but 10 years from now.
I guess the other thing that disturbs me the most in the conversation with you is that there is a body that does have oversight, who knows what the problem is, who's gotten a recommendation from you, and if we have another event, they're all going to sit around, one that is a successful event, not like this failed event, and they're going to say, you know, the system failed or the system broke or the system whatever. But the problem is that this is their responsibility to implement what was recommended that are good ideas. And how do we get them to do that?
I think we just have to keep raising it as an issue and keep having to saying, look, in the 9/11 Commission we gave two different models. There's a joint atomic oversight model that was used in the 1950s and the 1960s. My own favorite is to give the committees authorizing and appropriation capability to change the nature of the chairman and the ranking and the apportionment of the committee members. I would also, again, make certain that they've got the resources necessary to hire the people there, and then both leaders have to make a commitment that partisan considerations, political considerations are not going to be are not going to govern. It's going to be entirely national security. This is going to be one committee where partisan politics cannot enter into it, and they've got to have the capability and the willingness to do the work. So we make very specific recommendations, and all we can do, Greta, is just keep saying to people that we know in Congress, when are you going to implement that portion of the recommendations? Indeed, I feel if they don't implement it, they probably ought to repeal the changes that they made in the executive branch, because we made it more complicated, more difficult to do oversight, because we create the DNI, we create the Counterterrorism Center, and on Homeland Security as well, we created the largest of the executive branch agencies at all, and it's more difficult to do oversight unless you change the nature of the congressional committees.
Senator, always nice to see you. Thank you, sir.